Now it went on.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is January the 27th, 2019. This is our Genie seminar, and I remind everyone, as always, that this is being recorded. By being here, you're giving permission for whatever you say could be used publicly. That we hope that these meetings will become a role model, so to speak, that other people who want to start Genie seminars, and it's our assumption or belief that this is a new method of rapid education where people can come together from anywhere in the world and share their genius, share their ideas, and together we can co-create solutions to important problems. We hope the Genie seminar will be a new method of education, as is said, of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is a bottom-up form of co-creation of learning together by sharing the wisdom that we all have. And if we can have a series of these that starts in one place and then multiplies and can eventually become worldwide, this would be Einstein's, I think, solution to create permanent world peace if we can teach people through our co-creative genius to share together for mutual benefit instead of putting each other down. Right now we have sort of a tribal world where we're an ethnocentric world where people are identified with their own religion or their own country or their own political party, and dividing us into separate groups, leading to competition to see who can show dominance. That's sort of been the way the world has been operating through evolution. That's brought us to this point. And what Einstein has told us is that now that we have weapons that are so powerful, and his prediction that they would be proliferated in the future, and that they would be used, and it would be the end of our civilization. That's essentially his genius, what he predicted, and it's certainly been coming true. And then he told us the only way we can prevent that is if we teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, where people cooperate and work together. So we have a world-centric world. If we can change our way of thinking from ethnocentric, what's good for me and my family and my country for here and now, to global-centric or cosmocentric, as even the larger system, if we can instead change that one sentence to what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, that's part of the idea. That was Einstein's brilliant solution. And if we can change the way we think, just give this a little thought. Basically, it's not just nuclear weapons, but essentially all the problems we're dealing with go back to this root situation, this root cause, the addiction to this either way of thinking, where we divide the world into two separate parts. So it would be that simple. We create global warming. We create these nuclear weapons. We create pollution. Most of our situation we see with mass murder today are the way we think. Virtually all the problems we're dealing with go back to this, something that we create ourselves. And that's the wonderful news. If we create these kinds of problems, we're in the best position to resolve them. So that's the bottom line here. And so hopefully we're going to move forward with this. Now, the last meeting we said we're going to discuss patience. And I'm going to see if I can bring this up, if I can share my screen. And let's see if this will be it. Okay, here we go. This is a little longer than some of the others, but so I hope you will have some patience as you listen to this strand on patience. Welcome to Module 1, Strand number 10 of the Educational Community Curriculum on Making Our Life Wonderful. Today's Happiness and Love Creation Strand explains the importance of patience.
We require patience to pursue the common sense solutions that are necessary for long-term benefits. Patience is critical to teach ourselves the wisdoms that free us from dictators and to wisely self-manage our creative power. Patience is also the means we come to value prevention and thereby spare us the need to repair damage from impulsive action. Prevention is action we take now to convert a future negative event into a non-event. Since future non-events are seldom rewarding, we require considerable patience to initiate preventive action. Every newborn expresses the impatient motto, "I want what I want when I want it." The immature mind divides the world into two entities, me and not me. Helpless and requiring that every need be provided, crying, loud, angry, and as long as it takes to get attention is one of the universal hallmarks of impatience. Our work in progress is transforming ourselves from a demanding, self-centered crybaby into a powerful and wise creator. Patience is the voluntary decision to forego immediate reward or tolerate stress because we understand alternative action brings us preferable lasting future benefits. Patience involves applying common sense wisdom to knowledge. We imagine alternative courses of action, apply logic to choose from among them, and then devise a preferred course of action to reach the future goal. Patience is the mother of good judgment. Resignation, on the other hand, implies passively submitting to authority other than our own. For example, instinct and tradition demand that we automatically follow their directions even when they are not supported by common sense. Instinct and tradition are powerful dictators because they are hardwired to emotion. Common sense intelligence is supported by logic. Logic is devoid of emotion. That's why instinct and tradition usually dominate intellect until we attach emotion to common sense thinking. Instinct pre-wires us during the 9 months that precede our birth. We inherit a vast repertoire of the trial and error behaviors that have survived virtually every test nature has created over billions of years. Instinct's pre-wired commands to protect ourself and our tribe, irrespective of the harm to others, along with our superior intelligence, explains why we are among the 2 to 3% of Earth's creatures that have avoided extinction through the ongoing drama of creation. Instinct advocates the mindless emergency survival of the fittest and fight-or-flight responses that were successful in a primitive environment. Tradition consists of the tried-and-true solutions that our ancestors proved were effective to solve today's problems based on yesterday's knowledge. From birth through the 2 or 3 decades we require to free our thinking from fate and circumstance, we submit to whatever programming our nurturers make of us. Tradition determines our language, which country, religion, and political view constitute our tribe, our gender behavior, and even what we are to think. We benefit from instinct and tradition because they provide us many solutions that were arrived at by others' mistakes. They thereby spare us from having to learn by repeating the same poor judgment. Being programmed to benefit from others' solutions and mistakes is a fantastic asset. Instinct is programmed in our biology prior to our birth. Our nurturers program their traditions during our decades-long journey from birth to maturity. Instinct and tradition are very powerful because they live in the older portion of our brain that links them to emotion. Their hardwired directions offer ready-made, virtually automatic, effortless, easy-to-follow directions because good and right are clearly distinguished from evil and wrong. They don't require common sense wisdom to create newer solutions. Instinct and tradition are marvelous assets because they are on ready alert to provide us tested and proven solutions to challenges to our well-being. Effectiveness is based on past success. Common sense evaluation of effectiveness prior to action, what we call prevention, is lacking. It is a trade-off for having previously scripted automatic reactions to threatening situations. And since most of the challenges we face are repetitions of past challenges, hardwired solutions usually work. Unfortunately, this is not completely so. New knowledge takes us into inexperienced territory. Novel challenges may require that we bypass or override the demands of instinct and tradition. Creative solutions to new problems are a primary function of our mature cerebral cortex. Like a lighthouse's searchlight, one function of our freedom organ is to scan the horizon and focus on those areas that need attention. The cortical portion of our brain, when mature, has the ability to make good judgment by applying logic and universal wisdom to current knowledge. Our use of symbols allows us to mentally rehearse alternative actions, apply common sense logic to wisely choose from among them, and then devise the paths that create the preferred outcome. Voila! Eureka! Brilliant! Hurrah for our newer common sense way of thinking. But wait! There is a major problem. Emotion rules intellect. We engage in mental rehearsal. We clearly understand that the future benefits of delaying immediate gratification are greater and longer lasting. Yet we succumb to immediate emotional satisfaction. How often have you clearly known what is in your best long-term interest, but still took action according to what was satisfying or relieving of tension at the moment? Can you think of examples involving food or anger where you gave in to emotions and later regretted your actions? Since instinct and tradition are hardwired to emotion, we are innately prone to remain servant to the commands made by those dictators. Yesterday's solutions to new problems often lead to short-term gain at the expense of long-term pain. Even though our original self-designed brilliant plan offers a more lasting positive outcome, emotion commonly triumphs over good judgment. No matter how much we increase our creative power through new knowledge, our thinking remains servant to instinct and tradition until we teach ourselves sufficient patience to replace hardwired solutions with common sense problem solving. Patience is a necessary ingredient to attain mental freedom from instinct and tradition, what we call self-mastery. Common sense wisdom, unlike passively acquired instinct and tradition, is not hardwired. Common sense problem solving requires the patience to acquire knowledge, collect data, mentally imagine alternative action pathways, wisely select from the alternatives, and then devise and implement a plan to reach the preferred future destination. The secret of adding emotion to intellect to strengthen common sense thinking is the powerful wisdom to be provided in the next strand. Here's a bit of bonus information about the importance of patience. Nature has gifted us its latest model brain. It contains a freedom organ, our sophisticated cerebral cortex that distinguishes us from all other life. Collectively, humankind is provided the intelligence to become not only master of its own destiny, but also determine the future of Mother Earth. Individually, we may become master of ourself. We are the growing edge of a work in progress by a force that has created all that is about us. Only we have the ability to use symbols, assign meaning to our interpretations, manipulate our mental creations, and apply willpower to introduce new phenomenon into the physical world we share in common. No other life, past or present, has such power to acquire and interpret knowledge. We alone collect, store, share, and pass knowledge on to future generations who become increasingly powerful creators. We introduce new phenomena into the world like automobiles, libraries, and nuclear bombs, which nature would never produce without the action of our intelligent freedom organ. As we continue to amass knowledge of the universal rules of cause and effect, we increasingly add to both our creative and destructive power. Consider how each successive war introduces newer, more powerful weapons. From teeth, sticks, and stones that require direct contact to injure one person at a time, we have created such ultimate destructive power that one individual can set off Armageddon by the utterance of a sound or the push of a button without any personal contact with a so-called enemy. Due to the current explosion of our sciences, we have suddenly made ourselves such powerful creators that we now determine who we are, what we become, and who among Earth's creatures will survive. We suddenly find ourselves in a race to establish utopia on Earth before we become the first creature to intentionally cause its own extinction. The extraordinary drama of our generation is that after 3.5 billion years of life on Earth, our very generation has accumulated sufficient knowledge to make us master of all that is about us, as we yet struggle to make us master of ourselves. Humankind has elevated itself to become the most powerful tribe in Earth's long history. We are the growing edge of creation's work in progress. The more powerful we make ourselves, the less we remain dependent on fate and circumstance. With our privilege, we assume responsibility, and with it, our burden. With patience, we can teach ourselves a newer way of thinking that applies universal common sense wisdom to knowledge. With patience, we can claim our willpower and elevate ourselves to the limits of our imagination. Without it, we will continue to be dominated by instinct, tradition, and/or human dictators whose self-serving interests will predictably lead to the unleashing of our new weapons with ultimate destructive power. In the next strand, I want to be specific about how we acquire patience.
Okay, we are back to our meeting. Thank you, Brad. That was a little longer, but it was, I think, really packed with a lot of interesting and important information. And I would just, before I turn over the talking stick, just kind of suggest that think of our older brain, our animal portion of our brain, as a museum of all the things that worked in the past for the last 3.5 billion years. It is a museum of all the skills that helped us survive in very difficult times for 3.5 billion years. And the animal brain is probably 1 billion years old. We know dinosaurs had small brains, but they had brains, and they became extinct 600 or 700 million years ago. But so let's say that our animal brain at least goes back 1 billion years, and our human brain, our cortex, is said to be only its beginnings a couple of million years ago. So you see what an infant our thinking brain is compared to the dominance of our animal brain when we're born. And it takes several generations before we educate our human brain, or what we've been calling our Genie organ, with sufficient capability using language and the ability to assume responsibility for ourselves. So think of this museum that really guides our life, and now do we have the ability to overturn that and direct as has been said, can we learn to use our new power by choice instead of by chance? And then the last comment I would make, which struck me, I just heard this a few days ago, if we think about it, with our new knowledge and our new scientific revolution, our ability to change things so rapidly now, that we are directing evolution hundreds of thousands of times faster than nature has. It's taken us 3.5 billion years, and think of nature's patience, how slowly we've gone from one cell to a 500 billion cell organism. We change by nature so slowly, but look what's happening to us in just the last 100 years, how much we're changing, not just ourselves, but we're so rapidly and even with more speed changing the whole world. So with that, I pass the talking stick around, and we ask that offer you the opportunity to share how you can personally relate this to your life and your experience with patients, and how capable you are in using this skill.
I'm not sure exactly where the correlation is, but I've just found that inherently, as I get older, my level of patience increases. I'm absolutely serious, and I see Josephine nodding. I just find that a couple of things people have said to me over the years, and someone once said to me, "Don't sweat the small stuff." I listened to that, and I actually heard what was beneath something so fundamental, and it's true. I worked for a man once. He saw that I was stressed about an issue, and I said, "I don't know how we can possibly do this, and it can't continue this." And he looked at me and he said, "What would you do if your life depended on it?" That brought me up short too. I thought about that with my children. I call them children. They're young adults. With them, I am infinitely more patient than I ever was when they were growing up. And I think part of that is the job is tougher when they're growing up, certainly. But I'll go back to my original statement and not get too verbose about this. I think that one of the things that age brings, we say it brings grace. I think part of that is you're more patient. I just know that I am. Thank heaven.
I was laughing because I was thinking something along the same lines, how the correlation between age and patience. There were some things as I've gotten older that I'm more patient about, and there are other things I have lost all patience for. So it's maybe it's the small stuff that now I'm not sweating, but then I used to have it on my notebook when I was in school, like, don't sweat the small stuff was rule 1. Rule 2 is everything is small stuff, you know? So I think there was a book or something. I must have seen it somewhere and I copied it. And I think the things that I'm more patient about is the small stuff. I think I'm a lot more patient with that. I let the little things go, right? But it's these bigger things that I'm lacking patience with. The things don't have to be as bad as they are, I think, and if we work together as a society. And I think those are the kinds of things that really bother me.
Josephine, as you let the little things go, do you find that it becomes easier to identify them and dismiss them?
Yes. Oh yeah.
I do too. And the only thing I want to add to the comment that I made, not to monopolize this, is that I'm listening to Josephine and I'm realizing I'm saying yes, yes, yes. And I think part of it is, as I get older, my patience is more judicious. Because I'm like she. There are things that I can still get my cork out about, and there are things that I let ride.
I have the same experience. I've always been kind of patient and, according to my wife, sometimes pathologically patient. But I think that there's a growing older, there's a maturation thing that may be operating, where I think a lot of what we see in older people as wisdom is kind of born out of watching people be patient and consider things that we tend to react immediately to. I wonder if some of it comes with growing up in a world or a society where in our youth we're kind of trained that things are either right or wrong, and it's our job to get it right. And that's what makes you good, when you're a kid, if you can, please your parents and your elders and your boss. And I think there's something about, as you get older, that right or wrong thing gets a little more squishy. And I think it generates less anxiety about, am I doing it wrong or right? And I think there's a sense of, I have the ability to decide about it. If someone tells you not to put your hand in the cookie jar and punishes you, you have a sense of what's right and wrong. But, you can also, later on in your life, you can put your hand in the cookie jar anytime, but, you put on some weight and spend a lot on cookies. My personal solution was I used to eat dry dog food when I was a kid. We used to keep it under the sink in the kitchen. I used to snack on dry dog food, which I came to like, and no one ever bothered me about it.
It was Purina Chow.
Yeah, it was good.
Did you wind up at all chasing cars?
No. But I think some of this some of this, the whole model of a newer way of thinking, I think is just trying to accelerate a kind of thinking that in some people happens as they get older with maturity and experience. I think it's not completely a sea change in the way we think, but I think it's a more mature way of thinking that happens to many people as they get older.
Well, I think after eating the dogwood, you're fortunate you got older.
I'm not sure I'm more patient now. I think about, not suffering fools gladly. I have, if somebody has something to say or behave or whatever that, I don't know, I don't approve of or I don't think is right, I don't want to spend the time on that person, trying to educate them particularly. I just try not to be in their company. So I don't know if that's patience or wisdom or neither one. But if it's a real jerk, I feel it's a real jerk. He or she's a real jerk. I don't want to be around them.
Yeah, this is focusing the initial point. It's sharpening a little bit, because I absolutely concur with that, and I'm the same way. I've used that expression, not to suffer fools gladly, sometimes to explain positions I take on things to my daughter, and I find that I instantly can decide that someone is saying something so incredibly stupid that I don't want to deal with it. A friend of mine who is a therapist said to me, and I think everybody's heard this expression, do you want to die on every hill? Meaning, you want to argue things that really have no inherent merit. And that stayed with me. I think it's what we're talking about.
Well, I think I think as you get older, you have to pick your battles. I think that's true. And there might be things that are irritating or you would like another way, but it really isn't worth arguing about or defending your position or attacking somebody else's position. It just isn't that important. Or you figure, I'm going to save my ammunition for things that are important. So that distinction, I think, grows.
I was thinking about patience this morning, only before the call. Um, my nephew, actually, he's the youngest grandchild in the family. He's number 13 of 13, and it's my youngest sister's youngest child. And he was over, and
I'm having trouble here. Who is it who's speaking?
had to speak.
Yeah, it's Josephine. Josephine, your audio is coming in and out.
About water and wasting water in particular.
Yeah. Hey, Josephine, your audio is not coming through. It's very broken.
I wonder if she can hear you, Abby.
Yeah, I don't think she can. I can see when she talks that.
I can.
Oh, you
No,
can.
I can. Is that better?
That's
Yeah,
better.
is that better?
That got
Yeah,
better
okay.
there for the moment.
Yeah, this is why I dialed in earlier and tried. So my nephew was here right before the call, and it's my youngest sister's youngest child, and he's, I think, 21 now. And I have this thing in the house about the water. Don't waste the water. And he goes to take a 20-minute shower, and I'm freaking ready to bang on the door and tell him, get out of the freaking bathroom. What is the matter with you? And I said, you know what? If I do that, it's going to start my whole Sunday just completely wrong. I don't want to get up on the right foot, on the wrong foot. So I waited until he was done, and we had a very logical conversation about water conservation. And he assured me he would not do it again. So I realized 5 years ago, even 5 years ago, I would have been banging on the door, turning the lights on and off, you know, opening the faucets, trying to get the water cold. But, and it would have started we probably would have argued and blah, blah, blah. So, like, whatever, the patience defused the situation. I hope he took something away from our conversation. And I just hope it won't, next time he spends the night, I hope it won't happen again.
That would drive me crazy too. To use an expression, I give you a lot of credit, Josephine.
Yeah, but not only did you not get mad, but you got a promise that maybe he would conserve water even when you weren't there listening or aware of it. So, the impact is a lot greater.
Crossing my fingers.
Okay. Well, he'll think of it now and then, maybe.
He absolutely
maybe
will.
A 15-minute shower instead of a 20-minute shower.
Yes. I'll take that as a start.
Well, comparable to this, both of my daughters, I would get up in the morning and every light in the house was left on. And I used to preach over and over again, please, when you're done, turn off the lights, and I would get up and be like a night game at Fenway. Everything was on. And I would say everything out of the parents' handbook that falls on deaf ears. You want to see the electric bill? Do you know how much? They don't care. They don't hear it. And the minute you start thundering and bloviating about this, the cone of silence immediately comes down. You just can't approach them that way. The way Josephine approached the whole situation. And where were you when my kids were growing up, Josephine? Because what you did worked. And what I did didn't. Showing them electric bill, I might as well be showing them, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They don't even know what that is. But that would get me very impatient. And if it happened today, it wouldn't. Of course, it wouldn't happen today. But if it did, I'd walk around, I'd turn off the lights, and I'd just say, oh, my God, give me my coffee.
Think about the alternative, though. If you bang on the door, flip the lights off and on, and you say, well, what's the likely outcome? The very highly likely outcome is, what's this crazy Ataman, that she's so concerned about a few cents worth of extra water. Everybody's got to use water, and I'm getting myself clean and enjoying myself. And so you can easily see how escalation occurs. And then, because that's usually what happens with confrontation. Confrontation usually leads to escalation. And if we think about it, not just about a shower, but thinking about it in one country that says to another, how come you're charging me too much for my imports or whatever? And think of the escalation that goes along when we're not talking about people having bad thoughts about you, but when every nation, or at least 9 of them, are armed with weapons that could wipe out all of civilization if they let loose of their impatience. And of course, that's one of the great concerns. One person today, one person who is impatient could decide to push a button that could end everything within 10 minutes. And there is no prevention. Our animal brain and the museum that's in our head tells us with instinct and tradition that we learn by making mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. But Einstein's message is, all of a sudden we have this situation that goes totally against what our emotion tells us, that we can no longer make this kind of a mistake. One push of a button by one person is a mistake that has no second chance. So when we're talking about how long one sits in the shower, or the kind of things that are trivial in our life, think about the global situation, which most of us put out of our mind and say, oh, that has nothing to do with us. But we're sort of spinning out of control here.
it seems to me there's an element of patience there's an element of patience. There's kind of like the way that I want the world to be. I mean, there's a patience, the idea of accepting that somebody else just has a different opinion than you have, or a different way of approaching something than you have. Kind of at the local level, not to pick on Josephine, but the idea that you have some concepts of water conservation, and what it means for people to be wasteful, and if it's seen as a scarce resource, that you're wasting it when other people don't have it at all, and if you stop wasting it, then it could be shared by others, and to have somebody do without so you could have a little more luxury, that would be not appropriate. From somebody else's perspective, is like, well, it's water. It's warm. I really like the feeling when I'm in here. From my perspective, I'm not hurting anybody. When it starts to bleed over into other people's lifestyles, if it's just you, it's one thing. When it's bleeding over to other people and what they're supposed to do to accommodate, that's when some tension can or some disagreement starts to go, or can come through. And then I'm thinking that's where patience starts to wedge in, is, do you have patience for other people do see things that you really don't think are appropriate, or not, or think are inappropriate and, mean-spirited, where other people might not have that. And that kind of recognition of what's it like to sit in somebody else's shoes. It takes patience maybe to do that, and how that might fit in. By the time it gets to, leaders pushing nuclear bombs, you can't really do too much about that at a local level. But if if I live in a condominium and the guy below me is selling bottled gas out of his unit, and, it's his unit, he can do what he wants, but, I really do feel threatened because he's taking some hazard materials and might blow up the building. It's his right to do it. And, I sort of feel like I got a right for him not to do it. I'm not sure the patience about the idea of, at least I understand where he's coming from, so I can negotiate with him, rather than just saying, you complete fool, you're building a bomb down there, and that's not safe for anybody else in the building. When their view is, hey, it's my apartment, I can do what I want. Do you need that level of patience to even have that conversation, to understand that, hey, we live in a free society. I can do what I want, but it has to be tempered with, you really can't do things that that harm other people around you.
I think you have to put that asterisk by you can do what you want until it affects others, until it impinges on others. You're living out in the wilderness somewhere and you want to blow up your home. Unfortunately, that's your affair. But if you're in you're around other people in an apartment complex, and we're talking about this with what Don is going through right now from some, thoughtless person who left a window open upstairs, and now an entire condominium is obliterated. You can't really just do anything that you want. I mean, we can within limits. There are limits on personal behavior. There have to be.
I think I'm thinking that's where the patience creeps in, is that, one person says you can't, and the other person says I can. And then having that dialogue is kind of where that middle ground can maybe be felt. And how do you get that middle ground? How do you assume that it's not just all about me, it's about others? And I think maybe that's where the patience kind of settle in, and can be the salve that might accommodate that process.
Well, that was a conversation I had with my nephew. It wasn't about just Auntie being cheap about water, right? It was a conversation about, yes, Auntie is cheap about water and I have to pay for water because it's my house, but, let's think about the global, globalization and how your behavior impacts the rest of the world. And it has to do with wastefulness and, and recycling and wasting water and the choices we make in our everyday lives about, just energy in general. So that was what our conversation was about. So yeah, you could take a warm shower, and if everybody in the world, which is where we had the conversations, if everybody in the world decided to take 20-minute showers, what would that do to the water supply in the world? So it's kind of, let's have a conversation about how your individual behavior, this little piece of individual behavior can have a global impact, and everybody needs to do their part. And that's what the conversation was about.
The thing you have to explain is that there's nothing, there's nothing being cheap about not wasting anything. That's not fair
Agreed.
to characterize
Agreed.
you that
No,
way.
but I am cheap. I just put that out there.
I would prefer to think you're parsimonious, that you're thrifty.
Sure.
There's a difference. I'm cheap.
I saw there is an article in our local newspaper, this town that I live in, which is a relatively liberal town. There's a kind of a liberal element in it. And they're trying to pass a local bill about banning plastic in all of the stores, or the kind of plastic used for plastic carrying bags. And there's a pretty interesting, editorial about it, because it's a very active group, and there, it's sort of a few people who have a very, very activist agenda. And the I'm trying to figure out how patients come in to this. Maybe it's the patience to listen to each other. The rebuttal of the article was, we understand, but we understand the symbolic value, but it's symbolic value you're asking everybody to go through. If somebody did a study and said, all the bags that we throw out in Glastonbury end up in the ocean and end up polluting the ocean, and therefore there's a direct change to the harm if we make our change, that's one argument. But, just to sort of say that it's very unlikely that the bags that produced in this town end up in the ocean and really would make any kind of substantial, significant effect on what the overall problem was. And it becomes symbolic to an extent. And
you're going to get it now, Abby. I can see. You're going to get it now.
Look at that! Look, Josephine's got her mute on, but I can sort of hear all the way in Connecticut.
We better start talking about the nephew in the water again fast. And we have that same thing here. Our communities, one by one, are all incensed about paper bags and about plastic water bottles, and it's an environmentalist issue. And not everybody agrees about that.
Yeah.
I think there's a point to be made on either side.
I think there is. And maybe that's, in a sense, how to tie this in with the patients. The idea is that, that's a pretty strong, I understand. I'm pretty sensitive to pollution, and on the side that I think maybe be a little bit more aggressive of policing people's behavior. But this was a really good argument, I thought, about just saying that, if you guys, as a bunch of do-gooders, we understand your point of view, but we just don't really think that we should all be behaving so you can make a point, and you really haven't demonstrated that your point is going to change the problem that you're claiming to address. So I don't know, that patience of somehow, how does this relate to patience? Is, if you stand in the other person's shoes and you're willing to do that and sort of see where they're coming from, you do bridge that ground to the point where you maybe can have a kind of conversation. And I think that's where that, you create the opportunity to have a meeting of the minds and maybe having some sort of common behavior, which I think is what we're after here.
You were saying, it's funny you raised science in that you thought that if they had a better argument regarding how your town's impact or footprint impacts the waste in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
I find that interesting, because what I'm seeing on the other side is that I'm not even sure right now in this environment how people are, political environment, how people are discounting science. We have people who are anti-vaxxers, we have flat earthers. So it's I'm not even sure, Abby, if someone brought you that science to show what the impact that one town starting a movement or participating in a movement, it not only is it having an impact and it's reducing its footprint, but it's influencing other towns to reduce their footprint. So it's not only the amount of plastic you guys are saving from the ocean, it's the impact that you're influencing others to reduce their footprint as well. So I think it has more than just the, I would have rebutted that rebuttal. So, and I would have actually shown, because I'm sure the science is there to show what, however many people you guys have in your town, if they reduce their plastic intake, what would that impact have on the larger environment for your state, even at the state level? So, but what do you do then, even when you show the science and people come up with these conspiracy theories, or they say, well, the scientists are all liberals and they have a liberal agenda? And I don't know if that has anything to do with patience at this point. That's when my head starts to explode. That's when I lose patience.
I think it does. I think still sciences still can be influential and persuasive. I think no matter what position anybody takes with large groups of people, there's always going to be a fringe. And, the only thing you can argue about is where the fringe is. There's always going to be somebody who has, a view contrary, which may or, which from the mainstream is just going to be off the wall. But everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I think there's always going to be. It's kind of like poor people. There's really nothing you can do to eliminate all the poor people. There's always going to be some, no matter what you do, that are going to be poor. You can say that the curve is such it's a very small amount, but it's always going to be something. And I just think from my perspective, I kind of filter that out. That I recognize that there's going to be people who have oddball or what I consider kind of wacky views on things. But I don't really pay that much attention to them.
I think it's very hard to divine and separate the political motivations from the science. And I'm a big believer in the science, absolutely. But if you show the science, you show empirical data to somebody, you're going to hear questions about the validity of the science. You're going to hear people screaming junk science. You go back to the climate issue and the arguments on both sides of the point about that, and you present the science, and people are going to say, well, what about that memo from the leading British researchers who admitted that they manipulated the science for political purposes and for economic purposes? And then there you go, you're back in. When the science gets questioned, the science isn't quote unquote biblical. That's the problem you face with the argument.
I'd say anytime, in any kind of, no matter what the agenda is, there will be people in the agenda who will try to manipulate it for gain. That doesn't discount the overwhelming amount of scientists who don't, and the overwhelming amount of evidence to support the hypothesis regarding climate change. So just because one British researcher or two or whatever, that doesn't discount the entire body of research.
No, it doesn't, but it contaminates it.
Well, anything can be contaminated. But I mean, you think about, any kind of rights that people look at gun rights, and you think about the absolute contamination of the NRA and the influence on having people consider guns to be the way to solve issues. I mean, that's a pure contamination, and it's a pure fabrication of why we should still continue to own guns as individual citizens. And we won't go down that road. We've went down this road before. But my point is,
no politics there.
Right? No, right. You can say it. No politics there, right? But listen, with the environment, consider if you're wrong, right? That's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Consider if you're wrong regarding the climate issue. I'm on the side of, yes, this is a real issue. We need to fix it. Let's do little things, everyone in their own life, to try to make things better. I don't think, Abby, that any element should strong arm anyone into doing something. So I agree with you. People get a little put off if you have some kind of stance, even though you think it's great, and you're forcing everyone into doing something. I don't think that's the way to enact change. So
I think there's a little too much emphasis on science, as the bastion of something of rightness or correctness. I think you have to remember science is something that we invented. It's our own construct. It's not a reflection of, it's our model of some natural order that we think we see, and we use science to kind of mimic that order. But science, it by no means is a universally appealing language to people of reason. We created it. I'm reminded as we talk about this in the shopping
Wait,
bags
wait,
and
wait. What
plastic.
is? Wait, wait. If science isn't the, we have to have an arbiter of truth. What then is the arbiter of truth?
Well, I think that's a whole separate discussion of what's the arbiter of truth. But science is a method. It's something that we created, and not everyone subscribes to that for good reason. It's an imperfect, evolving field. It's a perspective. But I think we can't use science as the bastion of truth the same way you can't use God as the bastion of truth, or the Bible, or the Quran, or any these are all our own constructs. We're worshiping our own gods that we made. So I think it's a little bit misguided and a little bit conceited for us to worship science as truth. It's fashioned by people and it's poisoned by people.
I think we need to start with the question, and then let's figure out what would become kind of the best way to get to the answer. And if it's not science, then is it God? Right?
Well, I think it might be both or it's not really either or.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the
barring
question
another.
is. If we're talking climate, then what becomes,
Well,
what
I
becomes
think that the example, I don't know if people have heard, there's this, when people talk about the environment, there's an old aphorism called the solution to pollution is dilution. The idea that, my car pollutes, but it's just a little bit, it's such a big amount of air and my car makes such a little bit of exhaust that, it's diluted. It's the same with the trash in the ocean, and it's the same, with most of our carbon footprint. But I think the issue, I mean, there's clearly some science that says that your car does make a difference and our carbon footprint does make a difference. But I think the challenge is a human one. How do you get people to own their little piece and make that meaningful to them? You might
I
make
agree.
the argument meaningful. There's another like a pleasantry about every flood starts with a few drops. How do you convince the drop that you're important?
Right. The Grand Canyon didn't start out as the Grand Canyon. We know
Yeah.
this.
So I think that I think the road to affecting that kind of argument isn't necessarily, I don't think science by itself is a road that leads to that resolution. I think that's a very human perspective, where I come from, how I think about it issue, more than if you just give people enough information, they will do the quote right thing, whatever that is.
And we're talking about science, and now that dovetails with conscience and human nature, which we brought into this equation. And you talk about people individually and people's thinking individually, and oh, good Lord. I mean, you build a brick, you build the issue brick by brick, person by person, and to get an average individual to think that if I throw out a paper bag somewhere, I could make a polar bear cry, it's going to be a hard row to hoe. Now, don't get me wrong, I recycle and I believe in doing that. But you get people to come around to that thinking one by one is one hell of an uphill battle.
I agree with you, which is why I think this whole notion of what's happening in Avi's town, so Avi, back to the town making a difference, maybe not one person, but when the town starts banding together, when there are a group of people, who are focused on something that is probably the right thing, because consider the alternative, right? It's probably the right thing. And then they influence those around them. And then you have that kind of groundswell. I think that's how things change with, one movement, one effort, one set of people deciding, one person sometimes deciding that this is the right way to go.
I think that's I think that's true, and it's positive in the sense that it is people have become aware of it and become aware of it's an issue. But I think there's also the issue of, if there's a small number of people who are convinced this is the way to go and they want everybody to oblige them, and not everybody really is as a zealot or even believes it as much. I mean, when you're making legislation for everybody And, you really haven't convinced everybody. You've just convinced a relatively small number of very vocal people. And that, first of all, I'm not sure that it's probably not going to go through, I think, in our town. I think the level of awareness is rising, which is good. But I think the idea of we understand it's an issue, but, to put these sort of have these behavioral, mandated changes on all of us, where we're really not convinced this really is going to make that significant of a difference, to satisfy this small number of people's belief that this is the right thing.
You have individual retail outlets who are throwing in with this, irrespective of whether a bylaw is passed to eliminate them. Some of our bigger shopping centers, supermarkets around here, have begun the process of eliminating plastic bags, and the water bottle issue comes up every few years. It gets defeated, it comes up, it gets defeated, it comes up. It's a back and forth.
I think, the conservative argument is that, well, if it's so important, then you ought to be able to convince people it's important. You shouldn't throw them in because you disagree. So that's the sort of the counter that, that's the, if it's that important, then can you convince it? And it's a lot easier to,
So wait, why don't you think it's important? Why don't you believe that your plastic use, even with you, an individual?
I personally do. I'm very, very, I'm very anal about plastic and recycling and stuff. I probably push out more plastic than garbage now in the recycling stuff. But the issue isn't whether so personally, I actually believe this, and I think there might be some benefit. I think that I am sensitive to the other argument, though, that says, well, I believe it, and I can see this small bunch of activist folks, they believe it, but I'm not, I'm not in agreement that you need to mandate that by law that says everybody has to do it because, I believe it, somebody else believes it. I think there needs to be a little bit more than just, this group. It's a very small activist group. I happen to believe, or, I understand where they're coming from, and I would even, that kind of law wouldn't really bother me that much. But there is something about getting overzealous with laws that when some group says that, hey, this is important to me, let's make everybody do it. It just doesn't quite sit that right with me. There is the conservative element says that, government really isn't in the business of telling everybody how they're supposed to behave. Even in cases where somebody is telling them in ways that I actually do believe it.
I was under the impression that I had resolved it on a personal level because I never, ever, ever throw one away. Every single plastic bag coming into my home gets recycled. And I make it a point to drive it to the recycling place and put them in the appropriate bin. So I think, okay, I've done what I should do.
I feel the same way, but on the other hand, the argument that our oceans are still full of this garbage and it's, it's probably killing the earth.
We're getting near the end of our time here, so make your last statements and we'll conclude our meeting.
When I was a communication major, and I have no idea what happened to communications theory since I graduated, but there used to be a concept of opinion leaders, and someone had done research to say there are certain people in the community who, when they say something, other people listen. And if you want to change people's minds about things, you identify these opinion leaders and get them to sign on, and then it spreads out from there. I'm not sure if that's even valid theory anymore, or it's been discredited or not used anymore, but it seemed like it made sense. I mean, I think you can hear it now with rock stars and singers and actors who get involved with things and they have a following all of a sudden. So, that's one way of changing opinions without creating a law. Sorry, I've been popping up and down with the movers here.
I understand. Pearl, would you have any comments? You haven't spoken. You have to unmute yourself. I don't know if you're hearing us, Pearl. Okay, Basu, did you have any comments? You've been on the line.
Yeah, so basically, I also agree with Josephine that this is a real issue, and actually, there are some examples in South Africa. I think in Cape Town, there is a real crisis, and they're running out of water, etc. But often, either politicians or some other maybe vested interest who might be having an industry which is probably benefiting from the climate change, etc. So they try to manipulate the media or even the research profession, and then change the narrative. So anything that we intend to do, there would be a counter narrative, and hence it's important that our communication is very clear, and also we have enough facts and examples to prove our point. And this sort of a climate change kind of thing is actually already happening, and there are enough examples.
There's a wonderful nature preserve in Florida called Gumbo Limbo. It's child-oriented, and they show what the people do and how it affects our environment. For instance, a plastic bag takes 200 years to disintegrate in the environment. And they also rescue that plastic in the ocean. And then they invite children's classes to the beach when they release them back into the water, and the kids applaud. And I think that's one of the most wonderful ways of teaching children how important the environment is. And I know that my attitude towards plastic changed immediately when I first brought my kids there years ago. But it's too bad that we don't have more teaching facilities like that, so the kids grow up realizing how important the environment, the world they live in is.
Rainey, you came on a little late. I know you're in a class in every Sunday that you're involved in, but do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Hi, everybody. No, I don't have any comments at the moment. So I was just listening to it and felt that, it's really, it's a privilege that you are part of a group that actually understands that, sees this as a problem and is working towards it and wants to work towards the betterment of the world.
Okay, so I'm going to exert my prerogative or privilege as a moderator to make the last comment. I think we're missing some of the basic point here, which would be that if we're born with impatience, if we talked about the museum we inherit, the museum of all that's been true in the past, that's pre-programmed us to think a certain way, to think in terms of two categories, that we're all born with this way of thinking that maybe starts with, I am tribal. I'm only concerned about me and my family and my tribe for here and now. Maybe your scientific information is right. Maybe 50 years from now, sometime in the future, the seas are not going to have enough fish to feed people. But I'm not going to be here then, so I don't give a damn. So who cares about these other people? They're non-human anyway. It's only my group. It's only my country that's important. Let's build a wall to get rid of all those. They're all bad people anyway. We don't keep them away from us. So if we consider the possibility that we're all born with this basic way of thinking, and we've advanced ourselves in our civilization so that a small, limited number of people are truly educating ourselves, and we really are changing the way we're thinking. See, Einstein's point of view was that we're addicted to a way of thinking from the time we're born, which is no longer compatible with weapons with ultimate destructive power. It was okay for 3.5 billion years that we go to war when we have differences. We settle our problem by saying who's the strongest and most powerful, and that the strongest now takes command, and their views and their values and whatever their technology takes over, whether it's they've developed a different kind of metal that's more powerful than destroying rocks or whatever. So that destructiveness has been the driver, and wars have been the driver of evolution. It's slowly brought about change. Einstein's, I think, point that we're missing is suddenly we've reached a point where only a few people have educated ourselves enough to realize that maybe it's worthwhile to think not just in terms of our tribe, but to think of instead of being ethnocentric, what's good for my family and my religion, my country, my political party. That's the way we've been, the way we've been thinking. And until we can change our way of thinking, there's going to be a significant number of people that are ready to say, I have the bomb, I have the power now, even the smallest person. Imagine if every lion, every tiger, every monkey, whatever, instead of being equipped with teeth, were equipped with a bomb that could destroy everything. And I think the message is, as long as we have a number of people that think in a primitive way, that is a primitive way that worked up until now for 3.5 billion years, that way being survival of the fittest, the physically fittest, and now all of a sudden we have developed this new way of thinking, this new brain rather, that is so capable that we can create weapons now that are more powerful than we've ever done. Our history has always been to start with small weapons, teeth and sticks and stones, and we keep gradually making bigger weapons. So now we've created the ultimate weapon that does not allow for second chances, but ultimate destructive power when released in mass. And Einstein's saying, wake up, everybody. This is the problem today. We don't know, we're all addicted to a way of thinking, but just think about it. From my point of view, the members of this group have educated themselves in such a way that we are a privileged few that have learned to think in terms of beyond our own tribe, beyond our own lifetime. We're now concerned about what happens several generations from now. The person who says, the plastic isn't going to disturb me, the fact, I remember when I was a kid and I was told, you got to eat all your food because the children in Europe are starving. And I would look at the food on the table and I say, if I don't eat if I leave some of my beans on the table, which I don't care for particularly, how is that going to affect those kids in Europe that are starving? It doesn't make any sense to me. And anyway, I want what I want when I want it. So I don't care if I throw some of this away. And who cares about those kids in Europe? As a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, do you think I was really concerned about something that was going on in a third world country? Absolutely not. They were non-existent to me. So I just asked you to give a little thought to come back to the basic issue. Are we able in some way to change the way of the root cause? If the root cause of the way we have problems in the world today, of all of the issues of pollution, of greed, of nuclear weapons, of starvation, because we, instead of having 1 or 2 children, now it's capable to have 12 children and have them survive. Years ago, that no one could have 12 children because you couldn't protect them. So we couldn't have a large population. Now one of the big problems is population growth. We're told that we're 7 billion people now, and we're growing so rapidly. If we keep going, there won't be enough resources on Earth to survive. We are polluting this. All these are the basic issues. And is there a way that we can get to the root cause of how do people think? And again, I say congratulations to all the people on this call, because you are the most civilized people, from my point of view, in the world. And is it possible that together we might have an idea or plan that we can come up with that will educate people over a period of time? As was brought up earlier, maybe we don't want to bother with the Hitlers and so on and say, it's gotten so far that we really can't try to educate all these people. We just have to kill them before they kill us. That seems to be the present philosophy that most of the major countries have taken because we haven't found a better way. The dominant way of dealing with the issues of the world today are still mad, mutual assured destruction. The biggest problem, the most imminent problem we have today is somebody, I think, is somebody could push the button and it's all over for all of us, not just our family, but everybody, because we're reaching a point where there are enough nuclear weapons on this ready release status, and we just don't want to even become aware of it. To say we've got a basic problem that's bigger than plastic right now. Plastic, it may take 100 years before they fill up the ocean. Starvation, maybe it'll take 20 years. But the experts in this field are saying, at best, we have 10 years. And the fact is that one person who makes one irresponsible act could end everything for everybody in 10 minutes. That's quite a different situation. But the fact that most of us really can't think of any way that we can prevent that, we just forget about it and we go to somewhere else. That's my take on it. And I'm optimistic that somehow groups like this, we can put our heads together and figure, can we get to this basic root of the cause, that we really, can we change the way people think? And patience is going to be one of the ways I think we have to do it. The other way, of course, is that we could just say we have more bombs than everybody else, so, and that's the way some people are thinking. We'll just have to bomb everybody else before they bomb us. That is the present way of thinking. And I'm not too happy about that myself. That's the only, yeah. So thank you all for coming and sharing. And I really congratulate everybody because you do come pretty regularly, and we are setting an example of how we can create. Maybe we have the brilliance. All of you on this program are brilliant. And so are a lot of other people. There are people all over the world who are brilliant. As you know, we have 7 billion people, and it's been said that maybe if just a few million people got together, they could influence the whole world. But the question is, can we get to that core group of people and influence some people to really make a difference in changing the basic way we educate people? If we were born with this rather primitive way of thinking, what's good for me and my family and my tribe, that is the meme that directs most of the world today. Just look at what's happening in the world today with every country now. What's good for me and my country, what's good for my religion, and what's good for my political party. As long as we continue thinking that way, it really is only a matter of time before somebody pushes the button. Well, I know I've extended my 2 minutes, and I hope it was in a good cause.
Well, I thank you, but I don't feel brilliant.
But
I feel sensate.
well, it's part of my impatience that somehow the idea that it's, I think that it's going to take a lifelong education for Genie seminars like this on a lifelong basis to really change things. But anyway, we're going to end the meeting now, and you'll have a chance next week to come back and think a little bit what we said, because next week we're going to have another discussion. The next trend is also on patience, but the next one is more, how do we acquire patience? Okay, so bye-bye, everybody, and we'll stay on for our business meeting. But thank you, and have a very wonderful week.
Is it a sign of impatience to say I can't wait until next week?
We all need patience. Let's hurry up and get some.
Clearly, the dominant theme of today has been water. I'm sorry, Don. Yeah.
But water is important. There's no question about it.
Yes, it is.
It's water that's destroyed us. We're going to be moving out of our unit simply because of water. We need to drink it, and we were drowned in water. So the motto here for today is we have to teach, is how can we teach patience, and I need to have a crash course in it.
I think you're doing admirably well under the circumstances, Don. I'd be half out of my mind by now.
Bye-bye.
We're limited
Bye-bye,
to
all.
the other half. Okay, we'll continue.
Bye.
And I'm going to stop the recording now.
I'm going to load the toaster. I'll be right back.